Absolutely.
All right, welcome to the Sunny Ray Show, everybody. Today I'm joined by Koleya. Koleya, how you doing today?
Good, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So, Koleya, you're, in my view, one of the foremost kind of Bitcoin industry leaders here in Canada. I know you've made a big name for yourself out on the West Coast. You've been doing great work out on the East Coast recently as well. So, do you want to maybe just kick us off a little bit, like really high level who you are? And then, like I said, I would love to kind of just go into your backstory, talk about all the great stuff you're doing in the industry.
Yeah, sure. I guess a little bit on me, Clay Carrington. So I'm the executive director of an organization called the Canadian Bitcoin Consortium. We've gone through a few name changes, but I'm really excited about this one because our name finally kind of reflects more of like who we are and always been. I have a background in technology, so I used to design combustion heating systems for oil and gas for about 17 years, and then tipped over into the Bitcoin ecosystem around 2017. So I'm an OG to some and not early enough for me, but love being in the space.
Awesome. Cool. So let's yeah, peel back the curtain a little bit. I was reading about your background before getting into Bitcoin. Maybe we can start there and then make our way through and talk about all the exciting stuff you do in the industry. But I love hearing about people's stories prior to Bitcoin, mainly because I feel like it provides, a lot of listeners, new people looking to get into the industry, a bit of like because a lot of the times when you meet people in this industry, it can be overwhelming and be like, oh my God, this person's been in the industry for 5 years or 10 years or whatever. But let's talk a little bit about your background. Is it true that you were born into like a very entrepreneurial family? And I'd love to, share with our audience a little bit about what you were up to before you got into Bitcoin.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely raised by a very entrepreneurial family. Both, I never saw my parents, either one of them, work for like companies. They've always been kind of self-employed. So uh, I guess I don't know, I could go pretty far back into the origin story, but
I would love
I
that.
always love to start it with like my dad. He was very, very entrepreneurial. He really taught me everything I know. And the way my dad tells the story, I think I was like Ugh. I was around 3 years old when he said to me, like, at some point, I'm going to teach you all about business. And one day you and I are going to go into business together. And my dad came from a really interesting background. So he was a musician for like 20 years. He actually started in a family band when he was a child, all the way into his 20s, and then got out of like, the rock and roll industry and ended up meeting my mom. And he was like, okay, I need to figure it out. How do I take care of our family because they wanted to have kids and he didn't want to have to go back to school because he had like a grade 10 education. He didn't want to have to work his way up a corporate ladder. He wanted to figure out if there was like a fast track. And he figured out that what every major CEO had in common at the time in Vancouver, where I was born, was that they all used concierge services. The CEOs would come into airports, they get picked up by limo drivers, and they get shuffled to wherever they were going. So my dad ended up taking a loan from the bank, buying a limousine, and then he really targeted his audience to like CEOs of these like major businesses. And when he got them in the car, he just asked them questions. So like 7 years, he went from one limo to like a fleet of 13 of them. He got to meet everybody. Like I got amazing pictures of him with like Leslie Nielsen and the guy who played The Rock. Like it was just crazy the amount of people he got to meet. But his favorite was being able to meet with executives. Like he had pictures with the CEO of Coca-Cola and stuff like that. So by the time I was three and he had this business, there wasn't really executive forums, how we have like CEO forums today. He didn't have any of that. He kind of had me. And he's like, I have to talk to somebody about everything I'm learning throughout my day. So it's going to be you. But the goal at some point is that you and I, by the time you hit 21, are going to go into business together. So it was a really interesting kind of like how my life started. Because by
Wait,
the time I was five,
how old were you? Sorry, when you start
I
five,
was
you said?
three when he started. I was three when he started talking to me about business. By the time I was five, he was like, "If you're going to be a woman in business, you also have to have etiquette skills." Because he's like, "The world is open. The doors will be open if you're a woman and you're also a lady." So he started putting me in etiquette training by the time I was 5 years old, and then by the time I was eight, he started bringing like financial planners, like kind of like coaches to the house. I remember them sitting at my kitchen table teaching me about like fiduciary responsibilities and compounding interest rates and all these different like financial things. And I was like, this is really fascinating. And by the time I was 11, my dad had like sold his concierge business and decided he was going to take everything he'd learned over the last, I don't know, 8 or 9 years and teach other businesses about this. So I remember my first weekend workshop, I was 11, and I started spending my weekends with a gentleman named Jim Rohn. So I don't know if you know about like Tony Robbins, like his mentor
Of
was Jim Rohn, and
course.
my dad and
Of
Tony were
course.
actually in the same courses together, and he would bring me into those courses. Of course, I was like the youngest person in them. And I would like feverishly take down notes. I was like, this is amazing. I loved business. And I remember the very first weekend one that I did, Jim asked the question at the end of the weekend, and he's like, okay, how many pages of notes did people take? And he's like, if you took like four more, raise your hand. And then he just kept asking more and more and more. And by the end of it, I was the only person with my hand left up. And I was like, I'd taken like 16 pages of notes, and he asked me to come to the front of the room. And I will also preface, I was 11. My handwriting was trash, and I'm sure that like my 16 pages of notes was the equivalent to any adult's four. But he brought me up at the front of the room, and I felt so proud. He was like, "What's your age and how many pages?" And he's just like, "She's going places. Like she's clearly really interested and engaged." And after that, I remember started my first business when I was 13, and my dad just kept teaching me all the way through. By the time I was 20, he used to send me across North America. I got chances to learn from guys like Eric Trump, George Ross, Jay Abrams, Nito Cobain, like all these major people. And I learned all about like branding and business and taking companies public. And I don't know, it was just incredible. And my dad and I did when I was 21, we actually started our first business together. And my dad came up with a design for technology for the oil and gas industry because he was very mindful of how, the stigma around the industry and how it creates emissions and how it's bad for the environment. And I was going to be a young mom, and my dad decided that we need to do something for the environment that would benefit the people and create a better future for the next generation. So yeah, it turned into 17 years of learning everything about forced air combustion heating systems for oil and gas operations. And I had some fun. I got to design them. I partnered with the Edmonton Airport, designed ground service heating equipment for the airport. I designed stuff for construction. I designed low density polyethylene for like plastics recycling. So I could do low density polyethylene, which isn't something that was generally recyclable. So it's been a long time in clean tech. And then yeah, crazy how it tipped me into this industry actually was it was after my father had passed away in 2014. So I wanted to keep the business going, keep his legacy going. It was my way of staying close to him. And I had never commercialized anything. Like my dad's part of the business was more of like on that fundraising side, and I was more like support to him, still learning. I was young. I had a high school degree. I didn't have an engineering degree, right? So I just learned everything from my dad. And I was like, how do I get this product out to market? How do I make sure that I can, keep what he designed going? I met this amazing woman named Suzanne West. It was my very first work like women in leadership event that I had attended, and I wasn't highly sociable at the time. I was a little nervous on trying to like tip my hand out there as to being like a CEO of this company that my dad had started with me. And this woman named Suzanne West was speaking, and she was incredible. She had this like crazy lines made of hair. She came in on her bicycle in shorts, like basically board shorts and a tank top, changed over into a dress, got on stage, and gave this whole spiel because she worked really closely with I can't believe I'm blanking on the name, but the gentleman who owns like Virgin Airlines and all of that,
Richard Branson?
Richard Branson. And he had taught her about this concept of and not or. And it was all about like you can be a woman in business and, right? So in other words, you didn't have to choose. And it was the first time in my life I actually heard something like that. Because I was like, okay, I'm a mom, I have two kids, I'm trying to like have this business, but also balance out home life. And she's like, well, you can have both. You don't have to pick. And I was like, I want to work with this woman. It took me 18 months, but I did. Honestly, I found whatever way I could to get into her company, to meet directly with her, to pitch her my technology. And it was epic. Like she ended up actually starting her own accelerator fund. She funded it $1 million to commercialize one of my product lines into oil and gas, directly invested into my company, and then spent 18 months mentoring me. And she just, and I had the most incredible time. And she talked to me a lot about blockchain and she had this idea for an organization called the Alberta Blockchain Consortium, and she thought that blockchain was going to help oil and gas hit net zero goals. And I was like, this is so cool. Unfortunately, after signing my first really huge contract and commercializing my product line, she ended up passing away of a really aggressive brain cancer. And it was really sad because she died very similar to how my dad did. So it was very impactful for me. And I wanted to figure out a way to keep her legacy going too. So I realized like what she had wasn't, it was like idea, it hadn't been incorporated. I met with some people in the space who knew her, knew me, and they're like, I think this would be a really great way for you to like honor her and keep her legacy going. So I was trying to do both at the same time, keep my dad's legacy going with his combustion tech, keep Suzanne's legacy going. And I funded and started the Alberta Blockchain Consortium. And I put all my own money into it, probably for the first like 5 or 6 years. Um, I did have some other people support along the way too. And yeah, it's been crazy. Like we went from the Alberta Blockchain Consortium to the Canadian Blockchain Consortium to the Canadian Bitcoin Consortium. And we're now the largest industry association in Canada. We act as a trade association, so we have a lot of international members that come in from all over the world looking to enter into the Canadian market. And we act as an advocacy group. So we lobby the federal government, provincial governments, municipal governments. We do a lot of really amazing work in this space. But yeah, so it's a bit of a weird origin story, but I've also never really worked for anyone else. I've always worked for myself, and I'm always trying to find new and innovative ways to, you know, have businesses and keep them relevant.
Wow, that's super inspirational. I actually had read all of that, but it was far more interesting hearing it from you. Wow, that's very inspirational. I'm still trying to kind of take it all in. So from clean tech to blockchain, what prompted your shift from energy? I mean, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but just curious, what was that conversation that got you to be like, I'm going all in on this new industry, and so early, right? You said 6, 7 years ago.
So it's like a couple like weird things happened in tandem to get me to break into it a little bit further. So first I had a company approach me that was like, oh, we'd like to offer you like an invest like buy 20% of your company, but for a couple $1 million, but it'd be in Bitcoin. And I never even heard of it before. And I was like, why would I give you 20% of my company for internet funny money? I regret so hard today that but I didn't know what it was. I'd never heard of it. And I was like, do I get like real money? Like, can I spend this money? Because I actually have bills to pay and like I can't just not have money. The deal never really kind of worked through actually because the company in of itself was, I think, actually a bit scammy. So I'm glad it didn't work out. But it was like the first time I had heard like about it. And then I had saw my mom actually post on Facebook, like, if anyone wants to buy Bitcoin, message me. And I was like,
Really?
what are you doing? What the fuck is going on here? Pardon for the cursing. And so like I just remember like driving to my mother's house and she had this like old man in her home trying to explain to her why she needed to buy Bitcoin with cash so that she could use that Bitcoin to invest in a Ponzi scheme called
There you
USI
go.
Tech.
Oh no.
And my aunt was in it too, and I was so pissed. I was like, Mom, just from a business perspective, I was like, from what I've learned about Bitcoin, I was like, you don't have ownership in this company. I was like, this is not a safe investment. I was like, you're using an anonymous internet money and you're giving it to this guy who is in turn making an investment and you have no recourse. Like they're not even based in Canada. I'm like, they're accessing a market they shouldn't. They don't have a prospectus. Like this is bad. I'd done so much fundraising. I knew about like what the exemptions with the Securities Commission were, and I was like, none of this is legally allowed. And then I think the third piece was like hearing Suzanne talk a lot about blockchain. So all of that got me like trying to go down the rabbit hole in research. And my first bit was I met this guy named Dan Soretto, and he was introduced to me at an event. And he's like, "Oh, I got like 20 grand in this pocket and like 30 grand in this pocket. And like, look, I'm into Bitcoin." And I was like, "Sir," I was like, honestly, I was like, he was a very slender Caucasian gentleman. And I was like, please don't say these things publicly. Like, you're gonna get jumped. Like this, I don't even know why you're talking, like telling me about how much cash you have in your pockets right now. But he's like, I teach people about Bitcoin. I was like, okay, like, could I book a class? Could I like figure it out? And all he did was talk about trading. I didn't understand it, and I tried hard. I was like, I was trying to study like linear scale, Weinkauf, Fibonacci, all these different trading things. And I was like, I don't get it. I don't think trading's for me. I was like, if that's all the space is people like trading internet funny money on weird exchanges, I was like, I think I'm good. Until one day I was sitting down at one of my classes, and this guy talked to me about Bitcoin mining. And I was like, you mean there's like an actual technology behind this? Like, Tell me more. So I got really hyper fixated on Bitcoin mining. I was fascinated by it. I realized I was like, there's white papers, there's like some technical things. So the guy who told me about it, I had him come over to my house and teach me how to build my first Bitcoin miner. So it was like a seven card rig. It was GPU based. It was in one of those like server containers, like old school back in the day. I was on NiceHash, and I was like, this is actually really fascinating. By the time I was done, give it a year, I had about 270 graphics cards going in my basement. Like I was overheating my house. I read every white paper I could get my hands on. I was running nodes. I was like honestly, Memory Express knew me a little too well because of how much money I was spending diving in. And every night I probably spent 6 hours just maintaining these rigs. I could be so well off right now if I had just bought Bitcoin, but I was so fascinated by it. And the more I read the white papers, the more I started learning. I was like, okay, this is really interesting. I was like, most of them aren't white papers. Like, I'll just be really honest. Like, they're just really shitty business plans from like 90% of what I read, or they're like infographic roadmaps. And I was like, people are accessing this stuff, and I don't think they really know how to keep themselves safe. So my first thing that I started doing was actually hosting lunch and learns for free. I was buying the lunch, getting the locations, and just telling people why you need to come and learn about the history of money, economics, and look at this industry from an economics lens. There's one thing that could be money, and everything else is just possibly interesting internet technology, and why you need to do some more research into it before making these investments. And that's kind of how I started getting a name for myself. It was really just like meetups consistently, trying to educate people like, what is blockchain? What is Bitcoin? And my aha moment was actually when I finally got to meet Saifedean Ammous. I hosted a blockchain and technology symposium. And I brought in like Business Development Bank of Canada. I brought in Deloitte. I brought in like MNP. I brought in all these majors. I brought in the Edmonton Airport. So every one of my contacts I leveraged from my life doing combustion technology. I was like, why don't we do a tech event? We'll talk about AI and IoT and blockchain, and we'll try and figure out what like a synergy between these technologies is. And I heard him, we got to fly him in. I heard him keynote, and I was like, so my next rabbit hole was economics. And clearly with my OCD, I get a little hyper fixated when I'm interested in something. So I had to read every possible book I could on economics, like what's Austrian economics versus Keynesian economics. And it came to the conclusion, I was like, the way I started looking at life, our government, the way our government manages our monetary system, it just like clicked. I was like, Bitcoin. It's the only viable answer in this space. We need to focus on Bitcoin. We need to educate people on their monetary system. We need to educate people on why Bitcoin is money. And that's basically the premise. So even though we were a blockchain consortium, the name came from Suzanne, that we were trying to honor her legacy. But the principles behind it, like we never allowed any companies that came in that ever did an ICO. We never focused on tokenization. We didn't teach people how to like buy or trade or anything else like that. It was really just education on the underlying technology. And if we talked about a token, it was Bitcoin. And yeah, it's kind of how that origin came to be.
That's awesome. I love that story. Okay, so take us maybe into some of your recent work. I know when I saw you in Calgary at your event not too long ago, you had just completed a discussion with the Premier of Alberta, who had just made a promise to, I think, buy some Bitcoin for the Alberta government. I mean, having been born in Edmonton, Alberta, I've got to say thank you. Like that, that is a bit of a dream come true. I didn't think I'd see things like that happen in my lifetime, but maybe take us into, more some of your more recent work, and talk a little bit about the recent pivot into like the hardcore pivot into Bitcoin and embracing the name and kind of like where you're seeing this all go.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting enough, I always saw our organization kind of like a Trojan horse. Like, yes, our name was blockchain, and some hardcore Bitcoiners were like, "Oh, you're a shitcoin organization." But to the ones who really knew me, like I even say Jeff Booth, he's like, "I come to your events, I'm here because I know you're a Bitcoiner, but your name doesn't reflect who you are." And I was like, I get it, but it's like it's a safe name for government, because if I can come in under this name and I can teach them about Bitcoin, like it's going to help move things forward. And he's like, no, you really need to like get your name to reflect who you are. And then I started hearing it from government, like ministry level, like high ranking government officials were like, you get more engagement from us if your name reflected the work that you really do. And I was like, all right, it's time. Like I want to come out and be more authentic, right? I want our name to actually reflect who we really are and who we've always been as an organization. So I guess I'd say like maybe the work in the last 3 or 4 years I could kind of focus on, but like I've been working on orange pilling the government, at least in Alberta, for a while. Like when Premier Jason Kenney was still in office, I had flown in Jeff Booth and Safedine to do an orange pill session, like a roundtable to teach them about like, okay, why can Alberta put Bitcoin on the balance sheet? We even had Deloitte there explaining like how it's possible and how we can make it work. And then I was super, super excited when Premier Smith got elected because I'd known her since her radio days. She used to interview me on her radio show. She had emceed some of my events, like she had attended our roundtables. Like I'd known her, and she's an incredible supporter and advocate for Bitcoin. So when she got elected, I was like, look, my ask would be help me create legitimacy in this space. And we need ministers to be mandated specifically to work with our organization to attract business to this province. I was like, if you can get me ministers mandated, I can attract you billions of dollars of investment through Bitcoin mining. I was like, Alberta is absolutely primed and positioned the same way that Texas is. We have a decentralized grid. We have the third largest resources for energy in the world. I was like, we can manage at least 20% of the global hash rate. And she's like, all right. So we got two ministers on paper mandated to support on the file, our Minister of Innovation and our Minister of Service and Red Tape Reduction. And from there, I started hosting trade missions. So inbound every year, we'd go out, and this year we had companies, 85 businesses from all over the world, from Asia to Europe to Latin America, come in to learn about the opportunities in Alberta, and then we do outbound ones to Texas. So we partnered really closely with the Texas Blockchain Council, with us, and then we also partnered with the Blockchain Association. So the two big guys in the States, and we're like, hey, if your companies are looking for geographic diversity and they're looking for opportunities for expansion, Alberta has gas. And we'll also work on attracting businesses to the States, right? We'll make it synergistic. Let's work on, cross like bilateral relationships. And they've been amazing to work with. From there, we've been able to secure, I don't know, like we have gigawatts and gigawatts worth of power deals that are coming into Alberta right now, which is super, super exciting. So the premier is very excited about it. To fast track that into kind of like your comments, I wouldn't say it's a promise. I would say that the premier directly asked if she could host the last roundtable we did at this year's trade mission on a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The way it's been explained from me is that it'd be a great opportunity to show real leadership in Canada. I was like, if they know it's a Bitcoin friendly jurisdiction, then we have a better opportunity of attracting investment into this province because they know it's like stable government, it's friendly government, and the government's willing to showcase leadership. So she was very open to having that conversation. And then Minister Dale Nally was like, okay, I think we want to table the Alberta Bitcoin Act. So the intention with the government is to table the Alberta Bitcoin Act. And when they came out with me this year to Texas in October, they announced that, the intention is to table this act. I've been able to see the government roadmap that they've built out, which discusses tabling the Alberta Bitcoin Act, as well as looking at a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the province. And one of the ministers has commented he'd like to see 2% of Alberta's sovereign wealth fund put into Bitcoin, which would be about $600 million. So it's a very strong potential allocation. Now, it's still a big lift, right? There's still a lot of advocacy to do because we have to get caucus on side. But we should have the roadmap to caucus ideally by the spring. Hopefully, it gets approved by the fall session. And then from there, I believe they're going to start working on the legislation. So we're going to start doing industry consultations pretty soon on how the industry would like to see this legislation formed. Then that goes to government. They develop out the legislation, bring it to caucus, and they get to see it once it's approved. So it's nice to see that leadership move forward. And then from a federal perspective, like we have a lot of really solid mandates that we're working on. We want Bitcoin recognized as an asset. We host quarterly roundtables with all the major banks and government and regulators in Canada on how we can start, you know, Bitcoin-backed lending, Bitcoin in your TSFA and RESPs, areas on like de minimis rules. How can we start getting more retail adoption of Bitcoin? And you can't get retail adoption if you're having a difficult time accessing bank accounts and you have to pay a capital gains tax and a $10 cup of coffee, sorry. So there's a lot of different things we're doing that can impact federally. And then we're working on like interprovincially as well with like strategic Bitcoin reserves, attracting Bitcoin mining and doing some of the stuff that the federal government doesn't have direct purview in.
Just that, eh? Wow, that's insane. That's insane. Okay, I think we've only got like a minute or two left. Koleya, tell everybody how they can learn more about you, how they can, I mean, And how does it work? Like, are companies, do they come on as sponsors? And if let's say like I've got a lot of industry, people that follow me, CEOs of companies and whatnot, if they wanted to get involved, I mean, what are the next steps on that front?
No, absolutely. So we are a not-for-profit, and that's how we set up. So, because our goal really is to be here and support the community, and the best way to support our not-for-profit is joining as a member. We have 5 tiers of membership that people can join in. Really depends on what the company is looking for. We do everything from business development, support on regulatory, government. We host about 12 events per year all across the country and some internationally. So lots of opportunities for public relations, brand engagement, brand awareness, things like that. If you want to learn more, our website is mybtccanada.ca. Everything's there on our website. You can see from our membership to all of the federal and provincial priorities. You can contact us on that website. We'll reach back out to you, book a call. But yeah, it's a really amazing ecosystem. You can see all the members that we have on that website. I think we have a little over 75 members right now, and some of the biggest names in Canada are working with us, everything from law firms to major banks to major exchanges to major Bitcoin miners. We aren't an individual, so we don't have individual membership. So it's not for like a person. It's more for corporate, but it's a great way to get your name and brand out there and support making Canada one of the top 5 jurisdictions in the world to do business in Bitcoin.
Amazing. Well, let's put a pin on it there. I would love to have you back on and maybe we do a bit of a deeper dive on some of these
Love
initiatives.
that.
But Koleya, keep doing you. I'm gonna keep following your work. And like I said, in preparation for this meeting, I read a lot about you and I was like, whoa, this lady is a powerhouse and she's got such a compelling story. And so thank you for sharing all that.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to share, and I really appreciate you having me on your show.
We'll talk soon. Cheers. Bye bye.
Thank you.